Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey ahead. Today we turn to Ukraine, not for its front lines, political headlines or battlefield shifts, but for something far more fundamental, namely its children. Over the past 3 years, Ukraine's youngest generation has faced the unthinkable. Not just the violence of war, but the slow daily erosion of their rights, their safety and their futures. The impact of the full-scale Russian invasion on children in Ukraine paints a devastating picture. It chronicles not only deaths and injuries, but the trauma of separation, forced displacement and psychological scars that may last for generations. So without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
The greatest victims of Russia's invasion of Ukraine are the children. Vladimir Putin's pointless war has ripped the childhoods of thousands of innocents to shreds and turned idyllic lives into a nightmare. 3 years after the war's outbreak, however, Ukrainian authorities are still trying to create some sort of semblance of a normal life for the children, like in the case of this preschool in Zaporizhia.
The entire system is built so that children are completely sheltered. You understand that safety is the top priority.
In many cities across the country, children have unfortunately gotten used to underground schools. Russia has shown time and again that it will indiscriminately shell any building that could as much as hide a civilian inside. Despite these various efforts by Ukraine, the children have not been entirely sheltered. Many of them have had to deal with traumatic loss in addition to the upheaval of their old lives.
More than 3 years since the escalation, and 1 in 5 children and young people say they've lost a friend or a relative.
Ever since the war began, virtually each day children have had to be evacuated. It is a joint effort by the police, uniformed services, and the parents themselves. As often as it is possible, the process is made to be as gentle as it can be, so that despite the ruins surrounding them, fear will not have a place in the hearts of Ukraine's youngest and most vulnerable.
And now we're zoning in on the East-splaining portion of our show. During its invasion of Ukraine, Russia has resorted to one of the most despicable acts that its predecessor, the Soviet Union, was very fond of utilizing. Throughout the war, Moscow has kidnapped and deported thousands of Ukrainian children deep into Russia with the purpose of Russification.
One of the main goals of Russia's war against Ukraine is the nurturing of the country's statehood and culture. Kremlin propaganda often paints Ukraine as an upstart nation that, according to the narrative, exists only because Russia allowed it. One of the ways in which Moscow wants to break Ukrainian cultural and national identity is by brainwashing its youth. Thousands of Ukrainian children have been abducted and sent deep into Russia for re-education. They are taken from occupied or ruined cities like Mariupol and forced to accept the Russian view of the world. For many of them, according to various reports, this is a very traumatic experience, which often leaves the children scarred, confused, and with an overwhelming feeling of abandonment. Although some of these children have been returned home, mostly under international pressure, there is concern that many of them will not be so fortunate. The Russian crime of abducting children is well known throughout the wider world. It is the official reason for the International Criminal Court's arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin and the Russian Commissioner for Children's Rights, Maria Lvova-Belova.
And now, as always, it's time to take a look at the issue in greater detail. So, let's begin. Between the 24th of February 2022 and the 31st of December 2024, the United Nations verified that at least 669 children were killed and a further 1,833 injured, most often due to explosive weapons used in densely populated civilian areas. These are only the confirmed cases. The real toll is likely to be far higher than that. The destruction doesn't end with lives lost either. Large swathes of Ukraine are now littered with landmines and exploded ordnance. For children, these aren't just faint dangers. They are traps waiting in schoolyards, forests, and even backyards. This silent, persistent threat will last long after the war itself comes to an end. As of the end of 2024, 737,000 Ukrainian children were internally displaced. Another 1.7 million have become refugees, many torn from one or both of their parents. Now, in most cases, fathers remain in Ukraine due to conscription laws. Mothers and children flee westward, often into uncertainty, trauma, turning into fragmented families as a result. In occupied territories, The situation is even more alarming. The UN verified that thousands of children were forcibly transferred within occupied areas or into the Russian Federation. These acts may constitute war crimes, in fact. But the true scale remains unknown, because the UN has not been granted access to the occupied territories or to Russia itself. Since the illegal annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions back in 2022, the Russian Federation has implemented sweeping changes there. These include the imposition of Russian citizenship, the replacement of the Ukrainian school curriculum, and restrictions on Ukrainian language education. Children are now being exposed to military patriotic training and Russian state propaganda. Now, in order to adapt, the Ukrainian government has implemented measures like mandatory bomb shelters in schools and a shift toward online learning. But these adaptations have their limits. Air raid alerts frequently interrupt lessons. Attacks on energy infrastructure cause power outages, disabling digital classrooms and robbing children of the consistency and structure that education should provide. The cumulative effect is a significant decline in education. After 3 years of interrupted schooling, millions of Ukrainian children are falling behind, not only in textbooks, but in life as well. The loss of routine and social interaction is already diminishing their future prospects. Every Ukrainian child has experienced this war, whether as a refugee in Europe, a survivor of bombing raids, or a student under a new imposed curriculum. The psychological toll is immense, while the long-term consequences are unpredictable and the scars they leave behind will not fade quickly. There can be no normal future until the youngest victims of this war are heard, protected, and restored. And now, here to shed more light on the issue, we have Ms. Olena Rozwadowska and Mr. Azad Safarov, founders of the Voices of Children Foundation. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Yes, dzień dobry.
So let's begin by stating something that might be obvious to you, but not the obvious for many of our viewers. War also means suffering for children. It's not just physical suffering, but also psychological trauma. So can you briefly outline with what types of psychological trauma you're actually dealing with on a daily basis in connection with this war?
Yes, absolutely. You are right. It's just a daily routine for us. Already 3 years of a full-scale invasion puts us in the situation that we have to spend sometimes our nights in a bomb shelter, and in the morning children have to go to school and we have to go to work. So it causes a lot of severe effect on mental state of children, especially those one who are living as much closer to the front line as possible. For example, such a city like Sumy, Kherson, Kharkiv, you will never find a full safety space there. So children are not going to school. They have only online studying. So you can imagine that it's also affect their mental state. They don't see each other. They don't see their friends from their schools for already 3 years of full-scale invasion. They can be also a victim of bomb shelling, and just recently in Kyiv we had a huge bomb shelling when children died also, and their friends had to see this traumatic experience and go through this traumatic experience, losing your friends, losing your loved ones. So mainly it's what we see now among teenagers and those children who come into our regional centers. It's a lot of requests on anxiety, on I'm afraid of my future, I don't know what to do, I don't understand of my emotions, I feel fear, and I'm scared that my father will not come back from the front line. Teenagers also, they may come with a self-harm, with the suicide thoughts, because they don't understand how to continue to make a plan for the future if you don't know where you will live tomorrow.
So this is a really tragic state of affairs with all these kids having to face hardships like that, including, as you've mentioned, witnessing Russian atrocities, for example, witnessing their loved ones die or be injured, and also the general sense of unease about their future. But there is one other category of kids, and this is something we don't see in other military conflicts, namely kids who are being kidnapped on purpose by the Russians, who are then trying to erase their identity. Some of these kids have managed to make their way back. Can you tell us something about their experiences? This moment when they are reunited with their parents, but also the memory of a time when they were essentially being brainwashed by the Russians.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a lot of such cases. Our psychologists work with this category of kids, and we have cases when the kids run back, like teenagers, 17 years old, running from Russia to Ukraine, explaining what happened with them there, that they have been indoctrinated, they have been threatened, they were not allowed to speak even Ukrainian language, and not allowed to call their relatives. They were told that nobody cares about you, that your parents left you behind, that you will get new Russian family, and also a lot of kids actually being promised by Russia, if they stay in Russia, being paid 1 million rubles and given house, which is a lie. We do understand that, but this is how Russians try to keep them there, by threatening and by trying to buy them. But a lot of kids are running from there and won't come back, and we work with them, and this is really a huge trauma for them, because we have cases when the teenager visited for 10 sessions our psychologist, and on the first 9 sessions she was just crying, explaining what's happened with her there. So as long Ukrainian children staying in Russia, as much trauma they get. So this is a long procedure. Unfortunately, they are getting back to Ukraine very slowly, and we want the world help us to bring them all back. But after coming back from Russia, there will be long therapy for this category of the kids.
And I would like to also highlight that that it's not just happened by some cause. It's Russia specifically targeting children in occupied territories, because it's very easy group for influencing on them, for brainwashing children. So any occupied village or territory or city, as soon as it's occupied by Russians, it would be the Russian language will be launched in the school, Russian program will be launched in the school, just like immediately in Russian, and teachers from Russia will come to these occupied cities and villages to continue to teach our children in a new program, and and they give a lot of pressure of the children that nobody's waiting in Ukraine for them, giving them this feeling of helpless, and those who don't, and those who are now even maybe afraid to be returned to Ukraine, because they really don't understand where is the true and where is the false, and whether it will be safety for them. So it's a huge issue, and without the support of international community for Ukraine, it's a big task.
And do you think that basically the international community is doing enough in order to collect all the evidence about war crimes? I'm not just talking about kidnapping kids, for which, by the way, Vladimir Putin himself was indicted by the International Criminal Court, but also other war crimes directed specifically at kids, like during the first phases of the war. We've had children's toys being rigged with explosives in areas that the Russians were abandoning because they were forced to retreat. There were all these nightmare stories about these tiny landmines called Velepie Stok, which basically look like toys, and they are being scattered across civilian territories by the Russian army. A kid can pick it up thinking it's a toy, and then it explodes, causing severe bodily harm. Do you think that perhaps a specific framework should be put in place in order to address that? Because there are hundreds of thousands of war crimes, according to Ukrainian authorities, many of them involving children, which have already been recorded by the Ukrainians themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. And I would say that a lot of international organizations who are specifically working in the field of documenting war crimes are working really good in Ukraine, and they have access. What the problem is that they don't have access in occupied territories, so we don't know what's crimes and what going through our children in occupied territories. But here in Ukraine, they collect a lot of witnessing, and we all together we also saw how Russians they bombed the infrastructure built for children, schools and kindergarten, and also the evacuation. While evacuation, they've been killing children and families during the evacuation, which is also forbidden by the law and the rule of war. The other question is that just this documenting it's until the time when all war criminals will be punished for these war crimes. It will take time. So we do documenting. A lot of international community organizations help us to document these crimes. But what people expect here is that all of these terrorists, they are put it in the prison, and it will take time. This is something that we have to all take into understanding that it's not it will be a long process because all of these cases should be done properly, and it's a long story in the Hague court.
And that's why it's really devastating when we Ukrainians hearing that some signals from the United States that some like commission investigators who are supposed to collect these atrocities are being dismissed, are being fired. And for us, it's really strange, and also strange that instead of punishing those who make these atrocities, Russians and Putin's Russia, there are talks again and signals coming from the United States about giving our land away. And so where is the justice? This is not what can people understand. This is not what can mother who lost their child because of Putin's war can understand. It is something not in the frame at all, civil society or all the rules,
Are you afraid that some of those cases, because you've mentioned the passage of time with respect to the trials of war criminals, but also with time, more cases could come to light, like when we're talking about one of the worst and darkest forms of abuse and atrocities, namely sexual violence. The victims are often reluctant to speak about it, and it's only after years that they finally gather up the courage to recall these terrible experiences that they had. Do you think that this is going to happen in Ukraine as well, and how do you think society should be prepared for addressing this issue?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that it will happen also because indeed time needed, because you can imagine you are a victim of sexual violence, and to be a witness in a court, it's not the first thing you wish in your life. So it really, they need the time for recovering, for rehabilitation. Time has passed, and it's much. Maybe it can be easier with the time to be witnessing in the court and to build the case. So it's really what is a tricky question, that with these types of war crimes, it's always challenge, because you need the time for collecting evidence, you need the time to talk with the victim, you need the time, as a victim itself need the time to understand whether she wants to be or they want to be in this case, and after that it's a long procedure. So we do understand that it will take time. What is really important, that these war crimes are not they didn't disappeared with the time. Yeah, so that's why it's so important, this process of documenting, and that's why also it's important the access to the occupied territories, because most of the war crimes are hiding there on those territories that we don't have access.
Well, of course. What about the psychological side? Because these victims, apart from obviously trying to, to redress the wrongs, to ensure that justice is being done, they will need help from society. Do you think that Ukrainian society will be ready for both the cases that it's facing today, but also those that emerge later on? Do you think, for example, that allied countries could provide help in the form of programs, in the form of allowing to, sharing of knowledge in terms of dealing with cases of psychological trauma, for example?
Absolutely. We receive a lot of support from international organizations, and we also developed a lot of Ukrainian national organization that provides numerous of rehabilitation program for different types of people who've been traumatized by war. So it's something that we are working on developing. Mainly it's a NGO, it's a charities and international community with government together, but a lot of these services on the ground lays on the shoulders of international and Ukrainian charity and NGO organization with cooperation with the government, and it's something that have to be developed in the future more and more. And it's also not a task for 1 year or week. It's something, for example, we need a more specialist that we have now in Ukraine. A lot of people moved from big cities to other countries, and now we needed time to find a new experts, new specialists, and it's something that we work in every day hardly. And in our foundation, and I know that our colleague from our area of work, and also with cooperation with government.
Olena Rozwadowska and Azad Safarov were our guests today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And for this edition of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Bye for now.